Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the stream. Um, let's get everything up and going. Everything looks good. So, welcome to the stream. We're still migrating the full stack dynos stuff. Um, one thing, one thing I've got going on is there's something going on with the NX plugin in anti-gravity. I don't know what it is. We may restart anti-gravity to see if that affects anything. But in the meantime, there are a couple of things to go over. Um, First off, we so I gave a presentation for NG Asia on Friday. During that presentation, we went over a lot of the stuff that we did on stream the past week in anti-gravity. But the other thing we did is we removed Zone.js using anti-gravity, which was a lot of fun. So that is the big change. The other thing we did is we did an architectural analysis, and it calls out the fact that we should move everything to SignalStore, which we will be doing. Hey, Ole, welcome to the stream, man. Good to have you here. So this is the two big areas I want to hit on today is SignalStore consolidation and then the Daisy UI migration. And see if we can get those both done. Once those are done, I think we'll call Angular Dynos complete for now. I want to take a look at something that's not necessarily Angular related, but very top of mind for developers in general. There's some new tooling out there that allows you to build MCPs in TypeScript, and it's supposed to allow it to be easier. So well, actually, I do need to call this out. Next week, I won't be streaming. We will be visiting my daughter's college. We're going to take her down to where she'll be going to college after the school year, and just going down and checking out the campus, checking out where she'll be living, and just things like that to make sure everything's all set and ready to go. So next Sunday we won't be streaming. The Sunday after that, I want to get into building our own MCP. I was trying SignalStore mutation. I really like that I can get the response directly in the submit handler. Yeah, they've done a lot of really good they've done a lot of really good, what do we want to call it? Like, hey, Michael, they've done a lot of really good developer experience there, and done a lot of work in thinking through the mutation stuff. This is another place, and I think Angular Dynos may be a good project for that, and maybe we'll come, we'll come back to Angular Dynos. I would love to use modern NGRX tooling in Angular Dynos. I'd love to use the immutable state. I'd love to use mutations. I'd love to use, there's a bunch of stuff that I want to introduce. Wow, that's awesome, Michael. Let's take a look at Ole stuff here. I'm trusting you not to rickroll me, Ole. So the NGRX toolkit brings even more flexibility. I really like that I can get a response directly and submit handler. Oh, this is awesome. So, we've got the store, the login store that he's injecting. He's got some signals set up here and an on submit, where he's calling the login function. Oh, you're awaiting the promise on the login. Very cool. Oh, you're doing a take one on the store. Interesting. Um, this ends the observable, and that's where the promise comes from, the take one. Um, take one fails if you don't get a response, but on a login, you probably want this to happen, right? You want to take one to fail. So if we get a success, very cool. So you got your mutations in here. You got an HTTP mutation with a request, your operator of an exhaust on success. Very, very cool. Very cool. Take one is probably a mistake. So here's the thing. I would actually, instead of going, because what we have here, and this is a common mistake that's made in a lot of places, but what we have here is this is declarative code that you've turned into imperative code with capturing the response and the response status here. So I can see what you're doing is you're trying to mix the profile store, right? You're trying to set the user in the profile store and then do a navigation based on the results of this, right? If it's a success, you want to do this navigation. I'm assuming you're on a login route here, and then if you get a successful response, you want to do a navigation. If you wanted to keep this as declarative code and as a responsive code, what you would do is you would have this login. Then what you could do is this set user could become an RX method. So you could have the profile store listen for the response of set user or the login store. So you could pass the observable from this store into the profile store. Even better, you could have a calculated user property on your login store, and then you could set that in the profile store by passing the login store. Maybe you make the user an RX method, maybe you make it a signal method or something like that. And so the login method would then mutate your store. The last piece here would be creating, you could do it a couple of ways. You could use an effect in the login store that would use the router to navigate to the slash route when you need to. But this isn't bad, but the need to handle the pipe, right? We're handling an observable and stuff like that. That really kind of goes away when you stay declarative and when you stay in a reactive model. And it's like, this is good code. It's just, and I called it a mistake, but my personal preference is to avoid what's going on here, to avoid going into an imperative model and instead stay declarative. Oh, it's dumb AI. Yes, but sometimes you want response result in the component as well with RX method. It's not possible unless you need to pass callback. Yeah, you've got a good point there, and there's always good reasons, right? Like when people ask, should I do this or should I do that? And the classic joke is, well, an experienced developer or an architect will always say it depends, right? And it really depends on the stuff that you're saying, Ole. Totally agree. But I do love this mutations, that you can add a login method and get a request, and very, very cool. Oh, hey, it's good to see you, man. Thanks for showing up. have a great tennis game. I really appreciate you showing up and giving me the Prime subscription. That means a lot. If you guys don't know, Faisal's a good friend of mine. Man, I originally met him when he was a junior developer, and he's one of the fastest moves from junior to senior that I've ever seen. Really, really smart guy. Good friend. Really, thank you so much for showing up. Have a good day playing tennis, man. But yeah, I really need to get into mutations and take a look at that. We're looking at the strategy to upgrade Tailwind. And I think one of the things that's really come out of this whole agentic flow type stuff when using AI is the need to understand what you're doing so that we can give the agent the best chance of succeeding. And what do I mean by that? Well, let's follow this Tailwind to Daisy upgrade path that they're saying. But we're not going to allow it to do it because it's explicitly pulling in some stuff that it says was found by glob patterns. We don't want this stuff pulled in. We really only want styles.scss. We don't want it bringing in any of the other styles. We want those to be built by themselves. This is the global style. So we're going to bring in the Tailwind CSS. We're going to bring in Daisy, and we're going to bring in our themes. But other than that, we aren't going to do this. And again, we can even add the comment that these are specific to the Angular app and libs. We don't want them imported into the global SCSS file. So we will add this comment to just give it some context and to give ourselves some context, right? We'll go forward from here. So the proposed changes. First, it wants to update the package JSON, and we'll go there. When I wanted to keep UI data, feature pattern, and if response a success, you need to open some dialog. What is UI-star? So you had to import the dialog in the store. Oh, interesting. Very interesting. I think so. This is where how do I put, like, when we're taught to program, we're taught a very procedural way of writing programs, right? Very imperative, very procedural. And so the mental models we develop of our UI and our code is very procedural, very imperative, which is not wrong and not bad, because it's much easier to think imperatively and procedurally, especially when you're learning something as complicated as writing code. Where that tends to cause problems and where we start to see those problems in the future is when we have an object like a dialogue, right? There's a reactive way to update the dialogue, and there's a procedural or imperative way to update the dialogue. And which one comes to mind first really depends on your mental model of your application and your UI. And what do I mean by that, right? So let's do this. Let's go to Excalidraw, and I don't even remember what this is for, but it looks cool. Oh, this was syncing data. I remember that now. Let's go ahead and reset the canvas here. So let's talk about mental models, right? And what we have is we've got a store of some sort. Let's push that to the top. Okay, this is our store, and then we've got a UI, and for this we'll call it a dialogue, right? And we'll make this one the text at the top. We'll make it blue, and then we'll throw kind of like a dotted box around everything, and this represents our application. And let's put that at the top also. Boom. Right. So, oh, come on. Why can't I? That's annoying. Normally I can click these multiple times. Come on. We may have to move stuff around so that I can grab these and move them. We'll see. Is it like a control click? Shift click? An alt click? It just gives us a copy. Well, we'll have to see what we do, right? So point is that with mutation, you have all three possibilities, and that is very true, right? But let's talk about like mental models, and the differences here. So when we talk about a mental model with an imperative or declarative way, our mental model is very the store updates, right? And that needs to update the dialogue in some way, right? So the store tells the dialogue, hey, you need to update, right? This is a very imperative way to do it. And it happens because, separations of concerns, maybe we want to keep the store here. We don't want to inject the store in the UI, or maybe the UI is an HTML dialogue, or it's something else where injecting the store just doesn't make sense, right? This is the imperative way of doing things. And often the way this is done is we get some sort of code, and let's rename this to not be application, but let's rename this to be our container. And the reason we're going to call it our container is this could be like a UI container that holds something else. But often the way this is done is we've got an intermediary in our code or in our container that handles all of this, right? And I don't know why can't grab. Can I send this to the back? Send backwards. There we go. Oh, come on. Send to back. Now can I grab this? Yes. Perfect. So we've got this pattern, right? This is the imperative pattern, where quite often we'll subscribe to an event, and we'll handle that event in the container. So the store will produce events, we'll subscribe to that event in the container, and then we'll push that to the UI. Abradores, man, today is a day of all of our old friends showing up. First we had Faisal, now we've got Abradores. Welcome to the stream, man. But this is a common pattern. There's nothing wrong with the store telling the UI dialog what to do. But that is what leads to subscription management and things like that. So one trade-off is that this is easier to do. And to your point, Ole, we may need this code to, let's say that there's some sort of property that we want to update here, right? So there may be some need for this to happen already. And this becomes the best way to do it, right? That's one trade-off. The other trade-off that we can have is the UI dialog can ask for our data, right? And in that case, the UI dialog will handle subscriptions. Maybe it's done through the HTML template. Maybe it's done other ways. The issue here is that in this case, with what we're showing here, there's still probably going to be some sort of interaction like this. However, this interaction may not be necessary with proper computed and proper properties and things like that. We can probably do away with whatever we're caching in the container and just grab it straight from the store, where the store becomes our source of truth for everything. And this is kind of the model that we wind up needing to break. Is when we go to a reactive state, everything reacts to the store. The store becomes a source of truth, and the store contains everything we need. So this property, and so this property actually becomes a part of the store, which breaks our need here. For this to happen, right? And it also breaks this necessity here, because the store now knows how to create this property. This property can be handled here. It's, we've got the potential for the UI, something in the UI to ask directly for this property. And this is where we move out of a declarative and an imperative and into, right, we can even say, hey, and we've got it backwards here, right? The container is going to ask for this. So let's make it match the container, right? And so this is the reactive way, where we go from the store pushing changes to things to the store being the source of truth for the entire interaction. And then everything else asks the store, hey, what happened? Or we tell the store, hey, this happened. The store updates, and then the pieces that care about the parts of the store that change react to that change. And that's where we get the reactive programming model, right? Because everything is reacting to changes in the store. They aren't, the store isn't telling them, right? That's the imperative model, right? Imperative comes from imperial, which comes from emperor, right? You tell things to do things. And it's just a different way of thinking. And um, it requires a different mental model. And it's not a mental model that we often think about. And that's the difference um, between an imperative and a reactive model. And I have my preferences. I prefer reactive containers and reactive models, but I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, you should always do this, because your team may not be mentally prepared to handle a reactive model. A reactive model may introduce other problems that you don't want to solve, right? Or you could already have an imperative model in place, and introducing a reactive model is just too much changes for what you're trying to do. So there are a lot of reasons why, I like this model, but there are also a lot of very, very good reasons not to follow this model. So yeah, that's my TED talk and my soapbox for today. Do you see often reactive code to be more pub/sub style of code instead of push-pull? That is kind of like a deep hole, not gonna lie. You're totally correct here, Obradores. When you move into absolutely, Michael, send me a link. We'll check it out. It's always good to be sniped, right? But Obradores, you're absolutely correct. The reactive model shows up in a lot of other places, right? Like when you talk about microservices, reactive models can show up in microservices with pub/sub, right? You publish events and you subscribe to events. That's a very reactive model. You could go imperative with that in a microservices architecture, but microservices architectures that are imperative tend to be way more brittle and don't scale and have a whole bunch of other issues, right? That's where you start getting into pub/sub. That's where you start getting into CQRS. That's where you start, getting into dead letter queues. You start getting into stuff that allows microservices to expand quite a bit. And it's very much a different way of thinking about things, right? And there are trade-offs, and it is a deep rabbit hole. Exactly. By the way, I find it weird that especially in the server side, reactive code pub/sub is often non-blocking, whereas imperative is, which is kind of weird. Well, it's a different model, right? So, man, you guys are getting me. Let's talk about this again, right? Let's get our Excalibur back. And let's talk about like pub/sub. So because it is a different model, and so server side, you have a couple of tools, and so let's say we've got something that produces an events, right? We'll call this an event producer, and then in a pub/sub model, what we typically will have is some sort of event bus, right? So this is our event bus. And then we'll typically, oops, let's leave that green. Let's grab this, let's make it blue. And then we'll have event consumers, right? So in a pub/sub model or a reactive model, our producers send something to the bus. The bus does some sort of processing, But then our subscribers listen to events from the bus. And I'm intentionally drawing it this way just to make it an easier model, showing that the producer is going to produce the event, something's going to happen in the event bus, and then the event consumer will eventually get the event. And this is inherently asynchronous, right? Because the producer fires the event bus says, yeah, I got the event, and the producer just goes on its merry way, maybe producing more events, who knows? But the event bus says, yeah, I got it, and then it processes things, and then the event consumers, the event bus has an event, the event consumer has, and maybe we should flip this arrow around, and we'll show it this way, just to make it simpler, right? The consumer has subscribed to the event bus. The event bus is now pushing the events to the consumer, and this is very much like if you were to flip this looks very much like marble diagrams from RxJS, right? Where something pushes an event into an RxJS operator, the RxJS operator does something, and then something comes out that a subscriber consumes, right? Very, very, if we squint, this is similar to a marble diagram. If we converted this into a line with marbles on it, and then, these ins and outs were marbles and arrows and stuff like that, right? So that's where the Rx and RxJS comes from. It's reactive extensions. It's very reactive. It's very much an observer pattern. So pub sub is very much an observer pattern, right? Where we have our consumer observing events. And this is why it's just asynchronous by nature. When you move away from this event, things become blocking, right? Because if we take out this event bus, then the event producer is producing stuff straight into the consumer, right? And the consumer may send messages back, and these become very blocking, very synchronous. You can put them on other threads and allow other work to happen in the producer and the consumer, but you're multi-threading, so they become non-blocking, but then you start dealing with like resource contention and all sorts of stuff like that. And the other thing that we have is event consumers are not, it's really often rare that you get a pure consumer. Actually, it's not that rare, but where it's often very rare that we get a pure producer, right? So often these are producing events themselves and they're consuming events. And if we didn't have the event bus that does the processing, and our event bus is often the multi-threaded part of the server, and these can be their own services, right? Their own microservices and things like that. But it just becomes, wow, I just got hit with like 100 different messages. I don't even know what happened. Let me flip my phone over so that doesn't happen anymore. But this is like when you're in this model, and it makes a lot of sense on the server, and server people are taught to think in microservices and event buses and pub sub and CQRS and things like that. This is very, very natural for back-end developers. Front-end developers, our event bus is things like RxJS, SignalStore, Signals services, things like that. These are often our event buses. But we don't think about the observer pattern quite as much. So yeah, let me go back. Let me grab the stuff that Michael was asking about. And let's pull that up so that we can look at it here. So Michael said, I would reset after form submit like that rather than have the store know about the form like that. We'll take a look at this. Yeah, exactly. Obrador says, yeah, exactly. By the way, I find it weird that especially, yep. I'm not sure exactly why yet, but I'm studying this stuff right now with Spring. Yeah, React Spring, right? Node.js. Exactly. And that's the thing is that with a reactive model, your mental model changes, and modern backend development lends itself heavily to reactive programming, um, and pub sub and event bus type programming, right? Observer pattern styles. Um, um, yeah, I was studying pub sub Kafka stuff, and it speaks about observables and subjects and observer. And I'm like, yeah, I already studied this stuff when I did some RxJS. Very similar. It is, right? RxJS is the observer pattern in the front end. Kafka, PubSub, CQRS is the observer pattern in microservices on the back end. And the observer pattern is very, very powerful. You'll run into the observer pattern in all sorts of places. It's very common in UI. So like if you ever build something for iOS or Android or Windows or Linux, you'll find that a lot of these modern libraries for that have an observer style pattern built in where events are created, you subscribe to events, you create events and do things like that, and then you handle the events. And the nice thing about that is when you look at modern UIs, you've got what's called the UI thread. And that's a single thread that keeps everything in sync. If you block that thread, then you wind up with stuttering in your UI or whatever. And so it's important that you don't block the UI thread. In gaming, that's the game loop. You don't block on the game loop, right? You try to keep everything you do on the game loop very, very quick. And if you can't keep it quick, then you move to other threads. Very, very similar in backend. And the best way to do that is often with an observer pattern of some sort. RxJS, Signals, CQRS, PubSub, Kafka, right? Like all of these different models that allow you to have an observer pattern. And once you understand the observer pattern in one context, to your point, Abraloris, you're going to be talking about things that can be observed, subjects that create observables, right? Subscriptions and all of this stuff. And then you're talking about subscription management, observables, observer management, and all of that stuff. So very, very astute. Even if you move the same logic into the store inside of an Rx method, it would probably still be imperative. At some point, you're probably going to write some imperative code, right? Writing purely declarative code, it gets back to as engineers and as developers and as coders and whatever we want to call ourselves, right? Every pattern we've used, we can look at it as another tool in our tool belt. If my favorite tool is a hammer, then everything looks like a nail. If I learn when to use which tool when and which tool is most effective in which instances, then when I come across a screw, I know it's better to pull out a screwdriver than to try and hammer a screw into a board, right? Very, very crude way of, condensing a lot of this stuff. But it helps us understand that, imperative code is good in certain instances and maybe unavoidable, right? Trying to cut a board with a hammer is probably not a good idea. I won't even say probably. It's a stupid idea to try and cut a board with a hammer. I can't imagine banging on a hammer and trying to get a clean cut. Right? When we run into a situation where we need to cut a board, a saw is always the best choice. Again, you'll probably want to run into arguments of like what kind of saw, right? Is it jigsaw, table saw, a chop saw, a band saw, who knows, right? Like all these different hand saw, who knows? All these different kinds of saws that could be used, and different kinds of cuts lend themselves better to different kinds of saws and different kinds of techniques, right? Cutting angles is better done with a miter saw or a miter box than if you tried to do it with like a jigsaw or something like that. You could do it, but there are tools that are better suited to the task. And that's the way I look at development tasks in general. There are tools that are suited to the task. There are tools that fit the task, and there are tools that, yeah, we could probably use them, but they'd be a bad idea, right? And that's the way. That's where I think our value, especially as we move more and more into LLM-driven development and stuff like that, the value of an engineer is not so much the code we can write. It's much more making sure that the proper tool is chosen for the proper time. So I agree with that. And clicking the submit button is always an imperative action, so you can't really escape that. And see, this is where we're probably going to disagree. Clicking a button is an event, as far as I'm concerned. And when you dig into like the reactive philosophy, so like RxJS is a reactive extensions for JavaScript. There's RX.NET, there's RxJava, there's Rx, for just about any language you can think of, there's reactive extensions. In reactive extensions, they're going to tell you that everything is a stream. Even a conversation between you and I is an asynchronous interaction that's a stream. I speak, you speak, maybe we both try to speak at the same time, maybe I stop speaking for an amount of time, right? So even things that we look at as inherently synchronous can be looked at as events happening in a stream of events. So if we take that button click and we look at the click events as events on a stream of events and we treat them that way, then we can get to a reactive model. And that's the difference. But if we over apply a reactive model, or we over apply a model that makes things more complex for no benefit, then we're causing problems. And this is where I look at like the NGRX debacle in the Angular space, right? And when I talk about the NGRX debacle, I'm specifically talking about how everybody looked at NGRX store and effects and I forget all the other NGRX libraries because I haven't used them in a while. But when we look at the old NGRX Redux pattern, everybody looked at the Redux pattern and went, oh, this makes a ton of sense. I need it in my application, right? And it didn't necessarily fit. And NGRX was out there saying, hey, you may not need the Redux pattern, right? It may overcomplicate things. There are certain places where the Redux pattern makes sense. Brandon Roberts and Mike Ryan got up and spoke about the Sherry pattern and different things like that, where Redux and NGRX make sense. But everybody's like, oh, hell yeah, I'm going to use Redux. And then we got to the ngconf where everybody just basically said Redux sucks, nobody should use Redux. I disagree with that point of view to be, but I agree with your assessment, Ole, that certain things can be modeled different ways, and the way we model it will affect the way we write the code. And we need to be careful about how we model the events and different pieces of our code, because we may not need a more complicated or complex model, or we may need a more complicated or complex model, right? It really, really depends on what we're trying to solve, and what the benefits that we bring by, making things more complicated or less complicated. Yeah, I find mutations to be inherently imperative unless you're extremely pedantic, but being able to await or convert to sub them, it is nicer than many cases of Rx method. And that's a good call out, Michael and Ole, is that there are cases where where certain tools fit better, right? And I like your call of saying pedantic. And this is a problem that I suffer from, and maybe I'm projecting onto others, but it's easy to regress into being pedantic when you can't argue the point being made, right? And this often shows up with when you're in the middle of a discussion and somebody hand waves it away as, oh, that's an implementation detail, or oh, we'll solve that later, or hey, let's table, right? But it also shows up in like a lot of the no true Scotsman fallacies out there. And it's a classic logical error, right? Where you'll say, oh, no true Scotsman would do X, right? And so if somebody does X, they're not a true Scotsman. So you set up this ideal, but then you've given yourself a way out when the real world can't hit that ideal, right? So no true reactive code would do X. Well, great, who cares, right? In the real world, we use all the tools at our disposal, and I agree with your insight here that, you know, unless we want to be pedantic, we need to embrace reality. Clicking clicking a button is an event, and then you can listen to it when X subscribers can be notified. But that quite often clicking a button is an event, but we can model it as imperative, lawyers. The issue that is applying the client's mental models is that it can definitely make development way harder because it can create a lot of complexity. And that is the real issue that we're talking about here, right? The real issue isn't that the models are right or wrong. The real issue is the models change the way everybody thinks about the code, thinks about the project, thinks about everything. And so improper models and improper abstractions and all of these other things, right, can lead to way more difficult code. And, you know, the current pejorative for the kind of code I'm talking about is legacy, right? As soon as code gets labeled legacy, nobody wants to touch it. Which is hilarious to me because if you go to other places, like say you go to a prestigious organization of some sort. I'm not gonna, whatever, but in a prestigious organization, a legacy is something to be celebrated, right? A person who's done something amazing, they've been around for a long time, and there's something to be celebrated. In our in our industry, labeling something legacy is basically like, yeah, we screwed up so badly, we don't want to touch it anymore. So it sits with the legacy label, but all that really means is that it's been put in the penalty box. Nobody touches it unless absolutely necessary. We've created something that's so dangerous that if you touch it, it's going to bite your hand off, and life is going to be worse than it ever was if you didn't touch the legacy code. And I'm exaggerating here, but we've all I've seen it everywhere I've been. There's legacy code that that nobody touches and nobody has the desire to touch. And when you look at legacy code, it has bad modeling. Often it's organic modeling, right? It never really had modeling from the beginning, never really had guidance. It has bad abstractions. Often the abstractions are grown organically. DDD refers to it as a big ball of mud, where if you push on one spot, there's no way to know where things are going to pop out in other places. And you always get messy touching it, right? And that's the importance of what we're talking about. Is one of the best things you can do. And this is where I think Agile has, and I'm not talking about the Agile manifesto, but I'm talking about the current incarnation of what everybody refers to as Agile. But especially Lean Agile. I think Lean Agile has really failed us in this regard. Because Lean Agile tells us, hey, we can take a roller skate and turn that into an F1 car if we iterate on it enough. Technically true, right? Technically true. But how many times do we have to re-platform that roller skate to go to something closer to an F1 car, right? An F1 car is, the pinnacle of engineering when it comes to automobiles. Um, there's so much engineering and so much balancing and stuff that goes into those cars, that assuming that you could take a roller skate and re-platform and change it a few times and come up with that level of engineering is silly. And that's the big failure of Agile, and Lean Agile in particular, is you're never going to get there. If you want to build an F1 car, you need to get engineers that understand F1 cars. You need to get engineers that understand the engineering that goes into F1 cars and understands the modeling and mental modeling that goes into F1 cars. If you want to build a bicycle, you get engineers that understand bicycles. Nobody ever is going to build a bicycle, well, maybe somebody will, by starting with a roller skate. And maybe somebody will as a challenge runner, who knows what, right? But that's kind of the failure here, is that in the 2-week sprint period that we have, we often don't recognize that, hey, we need to get proper models so that we can get what we want. Instead, we're like, product wants this. Great. What's the minimum viable MVP? We're going to build the minimum, right? If you built the MVP of F1 cars, you would never win a race. I'm not, a lot of people will come at me and be like, oh, you're arguing for waterfall, blah, blah, blah. I'm not really arguing waterfall, agile, or anything. What I am arguing at this point is, if you want to build a certain thing, you build the models that will get you that certain thing. You build the tooling, and you get the engineering that will get you that certain thing. If you don't do that, then it's going to be a much more expensive and time-consuming process to get there, because to get from a roller skate to an F1 car, you're going to have to change your engineering processes midway multiple times. You're going to have to change the chassis of the roller skate multiple times, right? Just to even get from a roller skate to a car is going to, you're going to have to engineer engines. You're going to have to engineer a chassis that can withstand the stresses. You're going to have to change the suspension. You're going to have to change the wheels, right? Like, there is so much expensive engineering that would take a roller skate just to a car. And there's so much throwaway work in the roller skate. Yeah, the clients want it today. Exactly. That is it. So let's go back and take a look at what Michael Small sent us in the Stack Bliss. I would reset after form submit like that, rather than have the store know about the form like that. The store should handle resets. Is that in regards to what we're looking at here, Michael? SignalStore feature composition. So this says we should take a look at the console. Can I open the console from here? Usually you could pop out the console. Does F12 just pop open a console? So Michael is sharing something here with a SignalStore feature composition, and it looks like we've got some interesting stuff going on with the store. So NGRX SignalStore is built off of composition, not inheritance. Great call out here. I love this. If you want a store which holds a value in the state, has a method that console logs that value, and then on initialization runs that method, you just make a SignalStore using with state, with methods, and with hooks, right? And with state holds the value, with methods defines the console log, and with hooks with an on init that calls the method on that state. So far, we're 100% aligned. I like the direction you're going. All wrapped inside the SignalStore function. Totally correct. And this is a compositional, and quite often people will call this declarative. It may not be declarative, but it is compositional. You know, and to the point that everybody here is making, at some point, declarative codes will become imperative code, right? So if you have an add function, inside that function, you're going to have imperative code that says, take number 1, add it to number 2, right? Now you can declaratively say add 1 and 2, and you can compose that by saying, you know, add one, right? You can compose those methods. You can add and subtract and do all sorts of stuff. But this is, yeah, I totally agree with this. Under the hood, those built-in store pieces are just SignalStore feature functions. Correct. For example, check out the source for with computed. And to further press this point, look at what is returned. It is actually composed of a with props, another SignalStore built-in feature, which you use to hold any miscellaneous state signal or not. One thing I would recommend doing here is, instead of MISC, spell out the entire word. The main reason is that for native English speakers, we know what this means, right? Because we see it a lot. But for a non-native English speaker, they may not know what this means, and it may become a concept in their mind that's associated with other concepts. So, or it could even make them think about a word in their native language that's similar, but not necessarily meaning miscellaneous. And there's a comedian that I've been watching lately that I really enjoy. I don't find him super hilarious, but I love his insights. He's a Norwegian, and his name is Ismo, and he's an older comic. He was doing his stuff back a while ago, but he takes the English language and really talks about, so in the Nordic countries, and I learned this from Marcus, who comes on our streams. Most Nordic countries learn English, and they can probably speak English as well as we can in the States, because they've been taught English through all of their schooling. And, you know, if you visit like Sweden or Norway, you're likely to find people who can speak English well enough that you probably don't need to learn Norwegian or Swedish if you go visit those countries. But what he said is that, you know, he learned English his entire life, and he said, but I didn't know how to speak English. And he talks about coming to the US, and he's like, I thought I knew English until I started learning the word ass, right? He's like, I thought I knew what ass meant. It's my butt, right? But he's like, ass has a whole bunch of different meanings. Like, you could point at something and say, that's ass, meaning that it's bad. However, if I point at something and says, that's badass, that means it's good, right? And so I got off topic here, but really, you guys should go check him out. I don't want to steal his stuff. But his insight is amazing in that for non-native speakers, and he's got a whole bit on abbreviations that are used all over. And he's like, I should have known that I was coming to the land of abbreviations when the country I was going to calls themselves USA. That's a big warning flag right there that everything's going to be abbreviations, right? exactly. It's about knowing English, but yeah, and it's kind of like saying I know JavaScript, but then saying I know the event loop, I know, I know all of this other stuff that is part of JavaScript. It's part of understanding what it is, but then going deeper. And so that, a small nitpick that led to a whole TED talk. You should probably check out Ismo. He's got some great stuff that's really made me think about the way we speak and stuff like that. And he is pretty funny. He's probably not oh, like if you look at the comedians I like, you'll understand why I'm like he's funny, but he's not. Like I enjoy Jimmy Carr. I enjoy James Acaster. Um, I enjoy. I don't know. I enjoy edgier comedians or comedians that are more sarcastic. His comedy's funny, but it's definitely um, George Carlin. George Carlin, very very good one. Um, Absolutely. Um, but yeah, the signal store is just a function that takes all the features and generates a new dynamic class, which contains those features and makes its public fields and methods available. And this is correct. It's a compositional function. So any combination of features within features, built in or custom, is valid. The main thing to know is that order matters, right? I would take out the just here, but the main thing to know is that order matters. And this is an important sentence. I might even bold this sentence because it is very, very important. To see an example of composing a store of multiple custom features, check out example arithmetic store. So let's go take a look at the example arithmetic store. Let's close this down. So inside of the app and inside of the stores, this is our arithmetic store. Oh, fascinating. Oh, I like this. This is Michael, I really like the way you've put this together. I really like this. Um, so um, so check out the example arithmetic store, and let's talk through this for people. Um, he's showing that we've got these functions with addition, right? And with addition is just a signal store feature that has a method add, right? And this is our imperative code, right? We're adding number one to number two. This is our declarative function and our declarative store that can be composed. With subtract is again a signal store feature that has methods that subtracts two numbers. With multiplication is a signal store feature that multiplies two numbers. With division, again, this is very, very cool. And then he goes about composing these into another signal store feature. So we can see with arithmetic is a signal store feature, very, very similar to this, but now we're adding another signal store feature, right? With addition. So we're composing a much bigger store or a much bigger feature from smaller features. And this is very declarative. This is when we talk about declarative code, this is very declarative. We're declaring that arithmetic is a signal store feature that has addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. We've declared this, right? There's nothing here about the implementation of these. The implementation is here and here and right. And that's the imperative piece of the code. But the declarative piece of the code is declaring the feature and then composing the features. To be frank, yes, debugging signal store can be a pain in the ass. And I totally agree with that statement. The really cool thing that is he goes even a level deeper. he composes another signal store with arithmetic, right? So again, more composition, right? Composition on top of composition, where we're adding the log store name, right? And hooks and all of that stuff. And in the hooks, we got an init hook. And we're just calling, the stores functions here. And we're logging things out. This is very, very cool. And so when we take a look at the initial stuff, right, this on init method takes the composed stuff, and this is an important piece that the order matters. If he put with arithmetic after the with hooks, well, the composition wouldn't be here. So store.add, store.subtract would not work. And I'm sure he's probably going to call this out. But we can see here is number 1 plus number 2, right? We've got 4 and 2. And so he's calling store add. Well, there's the log, and there's the addition, the subtraction, the multiplication, and the division. Very, very cool. And I like the way this builds on top of itself. Very cool. So it is composed of a custom feature that logs the name of the store, a feature which is 4 features that provide respective add, minus, multiply, divide, feature methods, and then an init hook to log uses of all 4 types. Perfect. To see an example of multiple states composed together, check out numbers and letters store. So this is the one that logs the store name. So one thing I would do is, I was able to find the example arithmetic store. Maybe add something in here that tells you, hey, it's in source app stores arithmetic store feature, or this one, the numbers and letters store, right, state store features. I know you can get there with like the F12 key and things like that. But just, for people who are reading, it might be easier for them if you provide that. That's my editor and me coming out. It is composed of a letters feature with all letters, and then computation of uppercase, upper lowercase, a number feature that keeps numbers as TypeScript numbers, and then computed to each string, and then those are combined into that store, and after that, an init hook logs them all. One thing I would suggest, and this is something that I've learned recently, this sentence is good, but it might be better to just have like a bulleted list, right? It is composed of a letters feature, this, and this, because that's easier for people to mentally digest. Like for me to digest this and see what's there, I have to parse this sentence a few times. If you put it in a bulleted list, I can understand each bullet point, and then if I need to refer back to it, I can refer to bullet points and things like that. But this is something that I very recently picked up in my current position, writing things for executives. Executives just want easy to digest things, right? And so learning how to make things digestible has been a big part of like my last year of learning. So yeah. I remember Michael said that there's a limit of features you can have, and someone ran into that. It was Deborah Carrata. There is a limit, and the limit is less to do with SignalStore and more to do with the way the TypeScript types are written, because the TypeScript types have basically an upper limit, and but there are ways around that, and in the beginning, that limit was much smaller, and what you would do is you would compose features of other features. Like I think in the beginning, the limit was around 8 to 12, and when we would hit that limit, what we would do is we would go and compose features that only had like 8 to 12, and so if we had like 64 items, well, that's 8 features of 8 features composed, right? And so That's the cool thing about composition. You know, it's composition all the way down. You can compose more and more stuff to get around those limits. You just have to be you have to be creative about the composition, and naming becomes much more difficult, right? So let's take a look at the with letters. So with letters is a SignalStore feature that has state. The state has a private property that can only be accessed within the store called raw letters. That's just the letters A through Z in a lowercase. This is my brain getting the better of me because this is the right way to do it. But my brain is like, nah, dude, you just create an array of 26 elements. In those elements, you have a function that adds, you know, the ASCII A value to every array index, and that's going to give you an array of the letters A through Z in ASCII. Then you can join those, and that's a whole bunch of mess to just get this, right? Sometimes unrolling a loop is the right way to do it, but man, as engineers, we love the beauty of not typing out all the letters. Instead, we type out more letters, writing the code that will type out 26 letters. I love our jobs, right? Because there are so many engineers following along with that, going, "Hell yeah, he's right," you know. And if somebody saw that, they're like, "Oh, that's so nice." But performance-wise, memory-wise, this is the right way to do it. So he's got to compute it on the store, and the computed takes the letters and turns them into an array using split, right? So we're taking this and we're computing the letters. And here's an interesting thing. This string is actually an array of letters. And we can prove that, right? Like if I take const name equals Michael Small, right? And then I just do name 0, I get an M, right? If I do name 12, I get an L. If I do name 5, I get an E. So the interesting thing about strings is strings are arrays. Hey, Dota 2 Attitude, welcome to the stream. Thanks for being here. So technically you could take a string and cast it to an array of characters, because I can even do like name dot for each, and then letter, and then console dot log letter. For each. Does it not have a for each? Name dot. Because there's at big. I must have done for each wrong. Really? I can't do a for each on. I guess not. So never mind. Never mind. This was necessary to be able to do all the array functions. I've been AI coding lately. Surprised how good it is. Not AI coding at work yet, though. To know how that'll end up going. Man. So here's the interesting thing. Somebody, and I don't want to misattribute this, but somebody recently said the S in MCP stands for security. Basically meaning, right, there's no security in MCP. And it's the way with a lot of AI stuff. When you make AIs too predictable, they're not as good as if you allow them to not be predictable. And if they're not predictable, then they're not repeatable, right? There's a whole bunch of stuff there. And some industries, especially like fintech or highly regulated industries, can't take on the risk of that kind of stuff right now. And so there are industries that make it difficult, right? The models did get way better. Exactly. I can tell it to code something and it'll be for the most part working code. That's absolutely true. Everything you said is totally correct. So ignore me here on the letters array. And so this computed is returning an object that has the letters underscore that returns the letters array. The letters capitalized is taking the array and turning them to uppercase. And we can see this stuff in the consoles here, right? All letters underscore. So this is all the letters in an array, and this is all the letters capitalized. So we saw that. And then with numbers is another SignalStore feature that we're including the numbers as an array. And then numbers as strings is taking the numbers and then just running them through the string function. Fascinating. And then numbers and letters store is he's logging the store name again with letters, with numbers, with hooks. And then he's going through and logging everything in the store. Very cool. Very, very good for teaching. I'm curious about this. Can I go here and can I do name dot map? Nope. However, if I do array name, yeah, no, you have to do the split. This is me just like trying to figure out where my gaps are in the knowledge of strings as arrays. So for more context, now go back to both stores and hover the store's callback in the init hook of the store. You can see all the available state and methods. And so what he's saying is here, in the on init, hover over the store, and you can see we've got everything available to the store. Totally true. Features could contain what would otherwise be a store itself. Consider with data service of the NGRX toolkit. By merely passing a service that fulfills an HTTP CRUD interface, that feature generates all the respective CRUD methods when tossed into a store, as well as the state of that entity, which is very, very cool. Right, this allows you to give it an HTTP endpoint, and it's going to generate all the CRUD features that you need. In my own work, we have various HTTP services of various types of entities like users. We could make the same user store with the same CRUD methods and state for every app. But if we just pull all those pieces like they're with state, with resource, with methods into a SignalStore feature function and return that feature from a with users function, we can throw that feature function into a user store, SignalStore, and call that a day. Yep, this is totally true. And this is the basis of what we were trying to do with the full stack dynos that we've been using. The full stack dynos is me exploring being able to do this stuff. We didn't have with resource, but we had a lot of the features here, and making a fully composable store that gives its own providers and things like that was the point of full stack dynos. That signal store can be injected in any Angular context with an injection context and provide the whole CRUD experience and state of the users uniformly in each app. And that's very true. And if we take a look at our Angular dynos, and if we take a look here, take a look at our stores, and we can go even a step farther with the add dyno store. We've got this store that's composed, right? It's a SignalStore feature, very similar to what Michael's saying, right? We've got state, we've got methods, we've got all this stuff. With edit dyno store, does that have what I'm looking for? It doesn't. Does the detail store have what I'm looking for? Yes. So we've created these features. Then we've composed the features into signal stores, right? We've got a state and we've got this edit dyno state. So using an edit dyno store or an add dyno store in our application allows us to create state. So with an edit, we don't want the user to be able to change the name and stuff like that. So we created this state to be different than the add state, right? You can see the add state is much simpler. It's just a dinosaur. The edit state has ideas like edit mode, OpenAI mode, and it has a different dinosaur. So if we take a look here versus here, and it's difficult to see, but there are changes here. We've got a call state in both. We've got an error state in both. That is just the base dinosaur. And then we've got with edit dyno, which is the edit dyno store, and then the with add dyno, right? So if we look at the with edit dyno store, the with edit dyno store has a computed in it that has some stuff that you can display. But the methods here, we've got a save method. So we've got the ability to set the AI mode, OpenAI mode, set the ID. We've got the save. We've got send to OpenAI, right? Those all exist there. The add dyno store doesn't have all that stuff. It's just got the save. And so when we go back and we take a look at this, so these two things basically set up state machines that allow us to have an edit state and an add state. And then we create an edit store type that is the instance of that, so that we can see, you know, these are the fields on that. And then the add store type is really just a dinosaur and a couple of things, right? And then our dyno store is of type edit store or add store. And then we create an injection token that's that we can use, the dyno store injection token. And then we create our own providers. So we provide an edit dyno store that is a provider. It provides this token. And when we provide the edit dyno store, we're providing the edit dyno store, right? That's our concrete implementation of this token. And then we also provide the edit dyno store because we might need it. We're using a factory to inject the dyno store, and then we're saying, hey, we depend on this. So basically what this means is that we get one instance here of the dyno store, and then the edit dyno store is provided again. But because we're using the inject and we're using a factory here, we're going to get this instance. So these two return the same value. We did the same with the provide add dyno store. Very, very similar to what Michael's discussing here, and I think a very, very good idea. Any combination of features, methods, or state or lifecycle is valid as long as you don't hit some edge cases. And you might want to, I would say, instead of saying don't hit some edge cases, I would say is valid for the majority of use cases or something like that. Because when you say if you don't hit some edge cases, now my brain is going, oh, what are these edge cases? Should I be avoiding this? What if I hit the edge case, right? Whereas if you say is valid for the majority of cases, then my brain is like, oh, yeah, this works for almost everything, right? Again, coming back to psychology, and I spend a lot of time in my current role just thinking about psychology, sociology, things like that, where the way you say things, like this, there's nothing wrong with this sentence, and it's 100% correct. But the psychological and the sociological impact of this sentence is way different depending on how you phrase it. So that's my feedback there. Custom features can often be as simple as lifting the inner features inside of a signal store into a SignalStore feature function. And this is the superpower of signal stores. Because this sentence is 100% correct, and this sentence gives you everything you need to know about how compositional SignalStore is. You can take a section of the SignalStore, put it in a SignalStore feature. Like, say you've got a with computed section that's getting really, really large. Maybe you've got a user computed section that's getting really, really large. You could move that user computed section into its own SignalStore feature, and suddenly now that large section you can replace with, with user computed, and you're done, right? Very, very powerful, very, very cool call out. And then returning that from a normal JS function, you name with something. And this with is important. It's actually not that important. The with is a convention, but that convention allows people, when they read through your code, to understand what's going on. That's why I'm saying it's important. It's not significant to SignalStore features. It's more significant to the way we as humans think. If you need a custom feature which knows about the upstream state, there are a few ways to do so. Depending on what you need, the complexity can range from passing a value through the outermost function to do some slightly nuanced but documented syntax, to the outermost function to some, I added do in there. Depending on what you need, the complexity can range from passing a value through the outermost function to some slightly nuanced but documented syntax. But once you get the idea, it's not that bad or can be designed around not needing. I would rework this sentence. I'm not sure. I think I understand what you're saying, but depending on your need, the complexity can range from passing a value through the outermost function. I would change this because this range, I would say, depending on what you need, the complexity can be as simple as passing a value through the outermost function, or as complex as some slightly nuanced but documented syntax. And then I would end the sentence here. Once you get the idea, like, take out the but. The but is a conjunction here that's not really needed, because the way I look at, and this has changed the way I speak, and a good example of this is if you ever start a sentence with "not to be rude, but," basically you've invalidated everything before that sentence, right? And you intend to be rude. I love you, but I don't really love you. I hate this about you, right? So but is a conjunction that I tend to leave out. And here, I don't think it's adding anything. Once you get the idea, it's not bad. And I don't know this. I think you probably had an idea here, but you didn't finish it. I would just say, once you get the idea, it's easy, and there are ways to design around not needing it. I don't know, right? Oh, this refers to this, the nuanced documented syntax. Oh, I'd just take this all out. I would just take this all out. It is 12 features, I think now. That's awesome. Um, if you refresh the page, I've rewritten various things. Okay. I'll take a look at it after the stream. We even created a cheat code in the NGRX toolkit, which was later adopted into NGRX proper with feature, which honestly cuts it most of the time for one-off features. My suggestion is if you're ever going to add honestly, don't add it. And this again comes back to psychology. And if you guys are going to get into public speaking or public writing, and I have to break myself of this because I used to use the word honestly quite a bit. But if I say you honestly, I think X, Y, and Z, a lot of people get hung up on me saying honestly, and they're like, wait, before he said that, was he being dishonest? Or is he not always honest? And now he needs to tell us that, hey, I'm being honest. I look at it kind of like, what's the, is it AK-47? No, that's a gun. HK-47. HK-47. The hunter killer assassin droid from Knights of the Old Republic, right? I think it's the second one. It's been a while since I played it, but I loved HK-47, but I look at honestly like the way HK-47 uses sarcastic, blah, 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 right? Humor, blah, blah, blah. Serious, blah, blah, blah. Menacing, blah, 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 right? Where he's always adding this qualifier in front of his terms. I look at honestly the same way, right? If you think about honestly like HK-47 saying, honestly, master, blah, 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 right? Then it gets a little bit like honestly doesn't have the effect that most people think it does. Often has a reverse effect, and you can leave it out of any sentence you have, right? Which cuts it most of the time for one-off features. If you're not that versed in the more nuanced ways to pass store state as an input to a custom feature. There's this paragraph, I think, is multiple paragraphs, and there's also some stuff here where I think you've got partially finished thoughts or thoughts that this is a problem that I have, and my wife calls me out on it all the time, where in my head, I've got like 10 different thoughts going on, and then I make a statement based on a thought that's 7 thoughts in the future of all of the other thoughts that I've expressed to people, and people look at me like, where did that come from, right? What? What are you saying? And then I have to walk them back through the logic on how I got there, and they're like, oh, well, why didn't you say that other stuff first instead of confusing us, right? I think there's some stuff going on here where there are thoughts in your head that you're trying to convey, and you need to take some time to slow down and fill this turn this into multiple paragraphs, but fill out your thoughts better here. Because I understand, I think, what you're trying to say, but I'm not sure. And the way I tell people, right, like the way my brain works is like, I wish everybody lived in my head so they could understand immediately where I am. But I have to slow myself down. I have to walk things through line by line. And streaming, I almost made the same mistake. I was going to go, and honestly, streaming, right? No, streaming has helped me in this regard, because I can't jump thoughts when I'm trying to communicate to people who aren't here. I can't look at you nod. I can't look at you confused, right? I get some feedback in the chat, but the chat is 7 seconds delayed. So I could be off 7 seconds down my thought process, and somebody's like, what the hell did you just say? What does that mean? Wait, how did we get here, right? And suddenly I'm going, oh, yeah, I skipped steps 1 through 6. We're at 7. And in the 7 seconds, we made it to step 8, and everybody's going, whoa, how did we get here? And I'm like, I gotta back up. I gotta, right? Slow down, Jason. Same way with writing. And a bigger problem with writing is I can communicate a lot of stuff with my eyes, my mouth, my hands, the position of my head, the tone of my voice. There's so much that I can communicate in a verbal context that doesn't come across in writing. And some people assume malicious intent in writing. Some people assume anger. Some people, like, there's a lot of assumptions that people make about writing. And so the more assumptions you can take out of your writing, the better your writing will be. Let's see. As you can see, basically, I would take the basically out here again. So basically, and as you can see, tend to mean the same thing. So as you can see, you are removing all need to know fancy input syntax and instead pass state into the outer width of the feature. And the store state is available right in the store and passed directly to your custom feature. Totally correct. Love this sentence. Lastly, you can patch any existing state in a store feature. If you have a feature that holds on to state called stuff that is an empty string, then a store or feature which has that custom feature in it can patch state, store, stuff, whatever. Perfect. I understand what you're saying now that I've read the whole thing, but I was super excited when I saw patch here because I thought what you meant is that you could take an existing store feature and add your own stuff to it, which is technically true, but I thought you meant that you could patch an existing store feature and change it to be what you wanted. What you really mean here is that you can change the value of an existing state in a following store feature. And this goes on to explain that. But my only thought is maybe use a different word than patch because my immediate brain jumped to, oh, hell, Michael's going to teach me how to patch functions from other, I'm going to learn something really, really cool here, which I might, but this is, I get why you're saying it because you have the patch state, but you could say you can use patch state or something like that. No problem. This is really, really well written. And unfortunately, you're getting a public feedback. This is the kind of feedback that I tend to give people if they ask me to do stuff in private. You're getting a public feedback. And thank you for allowing that to happen. Getting feedback in public can often be scary and painful. Don't take anything I've said as me attacking you. I have a lot of respect for what you put together here. I have a lot of respect for all of the effort that goes into this. Most people who don't create content don't realize that this, what seems like a small article, probably took Michael, I would guess, anywhere between 4 and 12 hours, just depending on what it took him to do this. Based on testing, based on rewriting, based on, there's a whole bunch of stuff that goes into this. So when you look at an article, and it probably takes a couple of minutes to read, and what makes this even more impressive and take more time is the fact that he created code examples to go along with it. And so, yeah. Testing is he puts that in quotes, but if he puts this code out here and it doesn't work, man, the first thing is going to be everybody yelling at him, you stupid idiot, you put code out that doesn't work. And it may be a small mistake and easily fixed, but everybody's going to yell at you over that and not read your article or anything. They're just going to be like, oh, your code doesn't work. So yes, I know testing went into it because your code works. And I agree with you, Ole. Writing is much more difficult than coding. And there are things that make it like one of the things that I'm seeing here um, is the use of the word just and other filler words. One of my suggestions is um, I use Grammarly to help my writing because Grammarly will help me get rid of things like just. I write very similar to the way Michael has written this, and that's why it's easy for me to be like, "Oh, this is a pattern I do. let's help him learn. Don't do this pattern because um, I like your conversational style here, but when you add just to something, it minimizes it. That's why when I was reading when I was reading like this sentence here, as you can see, basically you are removing. I was intentionally skipping over just, and the reason for that is, as you can see, you are just removing is a weakened form of, as you can see, you are removing all need to know fancy input syntax. So you come across, when you add just, you're minimizing yourself. And that's an important thing to realize, especially when you're communicating to an audience. Or another place to really look for this is in your work communication, when you're communicating with superiors, if you minimize yourself, people are going to see you as a weaker communicator, which can get you overlooked for potential promotions. So in your writing, take the time to realize, hey, I might be weakening this. And this is where things like Grammarly become very, very useful. At my current job, I can't use Grammarly because it's not allowed. We're not allowed to send anything internal to non-approved cloud. So what do I do at my current job? Well, I write things, and I write things very, very similar to the way Michael writes. But what I've done is I've created a list of rules for Copilot. I give Copilot the rules, and then I ask it, review this statement that I've written, tell me which rules that I've violated, and suggest ways that I can improve. And that is a way to help if you've got AI access at work. If you don't have AI access at work, it really comes down to practicing and learning not to minimize yourself and not to minimize your communication. And it is much more difficult to write. This is a skill. What Michael has demonstrated here is a soft skill, and somebody who can write at this level, 90% of the time, if they come to an interview with me, is a hire. A lot of other stuff can be taught, but being able to communicate and have the soft skills to be able to communicate in this manner, there's a lot here that's really, really good. And I can trust Michael to write stuff for junior developers. I can trust Michael to write stuff for senior leadership. I can trust Michael to write stuff for me, and I'm going to understand it. And so working on soft skills like this by writing the kind of stuff that Michael's writing here, by creating content and things like that, is going to help your higher ability, which especially in the AI and LLM, being able to write stuff that doesn't sound like AI slop is a superpower. Everything here that Michael has written doesn't sound like AI slop. And it sounds well thought out. And it's written in an approachable, communicative style that I really like. So this is well done. Right? This speaks more to me than like, I know your technical skills are good because of what you've written here, and then the presentation that you've or the code that you've written to go along with it. So just another FYI to people out there. You don't necessarily have to write stuff for the public, but putting things out there in public allows people to give you feedback, good or bad. But being able to have the soft skills and communication skills are going to spend sprint time to make write-ups like this perfect, right? Like these kinds of things are important. They're going to help your teams level up. And that turns you from, there's this myth of like a 10x developer. And I say it's a myth because oftentimes the people who are 10x developers are not good team players. So they may produce 10 times the code, but they may also produce 10 times the problems or 10 times, right? But there's this idea of a 10x developer. If I come into an organization of, let's say, 10 people, and I'm a 10x developer, well, the other developers account for 9, right? Because they're all 1x developers, let's say. And I'm a 10x developer. So we account for 19, right? And these numbers are just silly, right? Well, what if I come in and I make the entire team twice as good, right? Well, now we're 20. But what if I make the entire team 3 times as good? Now we're 30, right? We're nowhere near a team of 10x developers, but we're a team of 3x developers. And now we're producing almost double what me as a 10x developer adds to the team, right? If I make the team 4 times better, now we're better than double me as a 10x developer. Even though I'm only a 4x developer in this instance, I made the entire team 4 times better. And this is the type of person, and like Michael's saying all this stuff that if I heard it in an interview, I'd be like, hire this guy, hire this guy, hire this guy. Because force multiplier. Michael's telling me he's a force multiplier. Michael isn't just making himself better, he's making the entire team better. And that's something that you can do. If you can come in and be a force multiplier, if you can come in and make the entire team even twice as good, right? Especially as team size grow, right? Me as a 10x developer on a team of 50, well, we're really, like 49, like a 59, right? Me as a 10x developer. If I double the entire team, we're 100, right? If I 4x the entire team, well, now we're 200, right? Versus, 50 or 59. Force multipliers are important. They're powerful, and they make the entire organization better. They don't just level themselves up. Even if I work and I become like a unicorn of like a 25x developer, which who knows, right? I start to become a hero developer where everything lives or dies based on me. And when I'm a hero developer, I'm causing problems in the organization because I'm unpromotable. I'm a risk problem. I'm a liability from a company standpoint. And when you talk about risk, the most common phrase that you'll hear when companies talk about risk at a high level is, this developer owns more than 50% of the code base, understands more than 50% of the code base. What if they get hit by a bus, right? Suddenly we lose all of that. And the team is not just 50% less effective. Now the team has to learn what that person knew. The team has to, make up for the slack. And we may not be able to get one person who can make up for that slack. It may be 10 or 15. And so when you become those kinds, you become a liability and a risk. On the other hand, when you're somebody who multiplies the efforts of teams, you're one, making the organization as a whole better. You're promotable because when leadership looks at you and they're like, this person makes the entire team better, what if we gave them leadership over multiple teams? Could they scale that up and make, 4 or 5 teams 4 times better? Maybe they can't do 4 times. Maybe it's too much effort to do 4, but could they make 4 or 5 teams twice as good, 3 times as good? Right? You're no longer a liability because when we go through that whole exercise of, what if so and so gets hit by a bus? Well, the entire team has been leveled up. So their loss could potentially be replaced by one person, which may sound bad, but that makes you promotable. And you're demonstrating to the organization that you make the organization better as a whole, which makes you a desirable target to be promoted. And that's where, focusing on being a 10x developer is not necessarily the best thing you can do for your career. The best thing you can often do for your career is find those places in the organization where if you apply force, you're going to make the entire organization better. It's a concept known as leverage, right? Leveraging your force to come up with bigger and better outcomes. Yeah, this stream definitely got into more philosophical stuff, right? We didn't do what we set out to do, and it'll be we'll come back and do this after in 2 weeks when I'm back. I am happy that the stream went the direction it went. I do want to let everybody know that, and I want new people to the stream and old people to the stream to understand there's nothing wrong with distracting me. There's nothing wrong with pulling me off topic. The reason I stream is not to teach you guys Angular. Teaching Angular is just the vehicle that I use because that's the tool that when I started streaming I was using the most often. I also think it's a good framework. There are a lot of reasons why I think teaching Angular is a good idea. But me teaching Angular is not my goal. Me teaching web development is not my goal. My goal of this stream is to help everybody who attends become better in their job, right? I was talking to Ilias before the NG Asia stuff, and we were talking, and he was asking me about streaming and stuff, and I told him when you look at tech, the thing I love about tech, and this is one of my fears with AI. We'll come back to my fear with AI, but when you look at tech is one of the few equalizers that exists in the world. And when I talk about tech, I'm talking specifically about writing code and things like that. It's one of the few equalizers that exists in our world. When you go into some of these third world countries where people make in an entire year less than somebody in the US makes in a week, you start to understand what real poverty looks like, and you start to understand, things like the necessity for communities to be able to level themselves up. When you start to recognize that, you realize that somebody being able to get access to a computer, whether it's a publicly available computer or something like that, and be able to raise themselves in their community by using their knowledge of computers and coding becomes a very, very powerful way to make their community better. And so my goal is to provide as much high quality content that hopefully makes people better. I'm not going to be like, oh yeah, I'm making everybody. I don't know. That's my goal, is that hopefully everybody gets better from the content that I create. And so, if you have a question, ask it. if you want to know something, ask it. If I don't know, I'll be happy to tell you I don't know. I will tell you that I've been around the industry and I've done enough things in the industry that I probably have an opinion. I'll be sure to tell you, oh no, this is my opinion, right? And I definitely want to qualify things that way. But I have been in the industry long enough that I feel like I've got a good point of view and that I can help you be better. So please, take the time. Take the time to ask questions. If you're a junior developer, you've been a junior developer for too long and you're struggling to move up to senior, ask questions. This is what I'm experiencing at work. How can I move from a junior to a senior? What perspectives make me more desirable as a senior, right? If you're a senior and you want to move up, what perspectives, right? I don't have experience at the C level or the VP level, so I can't give you information there. But director and below, I've got experience, and I'm happy to share that information. I don't see it as a zero-sum game where if I give you something, I lose something. I look at it as if I make the world better, then the world's better. I'm better. Yeah. I don't know. That's me being altruistic and sitting on my soapbox, I guess, a bit. But I really do like sharing the information that I've got. I really do like the community that we've got, and I enjoy just spending time with you guys. But I think that's probably I need to end the stream on that note. Thank you guys for sharing, and thank you for your questions. And Ole, thank you for sharing your code. It allowed us to have a discussion. I don't want to put you in a defensive position, Ole, where you feel like you have to defend your code. Your code was fine. I think it was great. But it allowed us to have a discussion about reactive versus, other styles of coding. And philosophical debates are, once you get to a higher level, it comes down to theory, it comes down to philosophy, it comes down to sociology, it comes down to influence. As you get higher and higher in an organization, those become more and more important. And so being able to participate in philosophical discussions and communicate ideas in that way, I think is important. And so, yeah, I totally agree with you. I think mutation is a perfect addition. I really like the work that the NGRX extensions team is doing. And I really appreciate Michael bringing this stuff to the stream. And I appreciate you sharing today, Ole, and being brave enough to put your stuff out there. Again, going back to what we were talking about with Michael, it's scary, right? Like the stuff I do on stream is scary. Somebody could come in here and rip it apart. And, if that's what they want to do, that's fine. Luckily, I can just ban them and we're good. I'm joking. But okay, I'm only joking to a little bit. If somebody becomes disruptive, of course they get banned, right? But being willing to do that is huge. And I appreciate you doing that also. I saw Rainer reposted this one. I'm going to have to take a look at that. I do need to end right now. And thank you guys. I always really enjoy the advice streams. We'll get this up there. We definitely didn't get into any code today. Perfectly fine. I don't care. For those of you that do care, we'll get into code next time. And other than that, you guys have a great 2 weeks. And we'll see you in 2 weeks from now.